Hundreds dead, thousands infected across multiple continents, millions quarantined with whole cities in lockdown. But how did the coronavirus spread so quickly? We're going to trace the virus day by day over the first month of the outbreak, following its path from patient zero in China to across the world, and what might happen next. As people everywhere celebrate the start of a new decade, the World Health Organization is told that a handful of people in the city of Wuhan in China had pneumonia, with no other clear causes or origin. But there's one common theme that connects the patients: Hunan Seafood Wholesale Market. Many of these first cases are linked to workers at the market selling live fish, birds and other animals. As a precaution, the market is shut on January the 1st. Nearly a week later, on January the 7th, Chinese authorities say they've identified the cause of the pneumonia, a new virus in the wider coronavirus group, which includes the common cold and SARS. Now this sparks serious concerns. 17 years ago, the SARS epidemic began in China and went on to kill 800 people. The new virus is temporarily named 2019 nCoV, but becomes popularly known as the coronavirus.
今天，湖北武汉市卫健委通报
2 days later, on January the 9th, the first death is confirmed, a 61-year-old man. He was a regular visitor to the market in Wuhan. By now, 41 people are known to be infected with the virus. At this stage, Wuhan's Health Commission says there's no evidence the virus could spread between humans. Yet by week 2, the new novel coronavirus isn't just affecting China. On January the 13th, Thailand reports its first case. Now, to understand how and why the infection spread, it's key to look at the timing of it. Reports of the first death in China came just before Chinese New Year, the country's biggest holiday and a time when millions are travelling all across the country and abroad. As planes left Wuhan airport, so too did the virus. On the 15th of January, Japan reports its first case. Then on the 20th of January, South Korea does too. On the same day that South Korea reports its first case, it's confirmed the coronavirus can pass from person to person. And official figures become clearer as the World Health Organization starts to publish daily reports. This is when the numbers erupt, with 282 cases reported from 4 countries. The next day, 314 cases are confirmed, including 16 healthcare workers. It then jumps to 581, with the majority still in China on January the 23rd. With the numbers rising, the city of Wuhan is put under quarantine.
This is usually a very busy street. Another beautiful day in quarantine Wuhan.
Anyone in public is told to wear a face mask, and the Chinese government sends 300,000 extra masks to help. Then, at 2 a.m, it's announced that all public transport is to be shut down, and anyone wanting to leave the city has 8 hours before all exits are closed. From 10 a.m, Wuhan, a city with a population bigger than London, is in lockdown. A brand new 1,000-bed hospital begins to be built to treat the virus, with the aim of completing the whole thing in just a matter of days. China has history here. In the midst of the SARS epidemic in 2003, as Beijing battled severe acute respiratory syndrome, a new facility for patients was constructed in just 1 week. Almost a month after first learning about the virus, on the 30th of January, the WHO now declares a public health emergency, with the main reason being its global spread. Away from China, there are now 82 cases in 18 countries, but no deaths outside of China yet. And in Germany, Japan, Vietnam, France and the United States, people who have been to China are now infecting those who haven't. Come the last day in January, the virus spreads to England, where 2 members of the same family test positive. In China, meanwhile, there are now 2,000 new cases in just the last 24 hours, and the virus has now reached every state in the country, bringing the worldwide total to 9,800 cases across 21 countries.
The biggest quarantine in history right now taking place in China. I think you're going to see that more amplified now as a result of this declaration.
The United States declares a public health emergency and says that it will begin temporarily suspending entry for foreign nationals who have travelled to China in the last 14 days. That's against the advice of the WHO. Yet there have still been no deaths outside China. Come the start of the month, 3 more countries report having the virus, bringing the total to 24. Following on from the United States lead, Australia says it will also refuse entry to all non-citizens arriving from China. Australian nationals coming from China will be quarantined for 2 weeks, something the UK, South Korea, Singapore and New Zealand are beginning to also do as they evacuate citizens from China and monitor them for symptoms.
We have arrived at quarantine.
On Sunday, the 2nd of February, the first death is reported outside of mainland China. A 44-year-old Chinese man from Wuhan dies of the virus in the Philippines. And then by February the 4th, a second death outside the Chinese mainland was confirmed in Hong Kong. So looking back from the start of the year to February the 11th, the novel coronavirus has infected more than 43,000 people globally, the majority of those in China. And the Chinese authorities now say it's caused the death of more than 1,000 people in the country, although the number of new infections day by day has begun to decline. That means more people have died from the novel coronavirus than they did during the SARS outbreak in China. But is it as deadly? And what does the first month of this outbreak tell us about the nature of the coronavirus? Currently, experts believe the virus has killed around 3% of those it has infected. That's a lower death rate than SARS, which had a mortality rate of just under 10%, and other diseases like Ebola, which kills around 50% of those it infects. However, coronavirus has infected more than 5 times as many people as SARS ever did. So crucially, what might happen next? A lot depends on how well the virus is contained.
What we can use right now are what are called non-pharmaceutical interventions, preventing mass gatherings, potentially closing schools, potentially even introducing travel restrictions. It's going to be a real challenge to contain it.
The Chinese have been applauded by the WHO for their response to the virus, with the Director General saying they have set a new standard for their reaction to the outbreak.
The speed with which China detected the outbreak, isolated the virus, sequenced the genome, and shared it with WHO and the world are very impressive.
Now, the Chinese have admitted to their own shortcomings in their initial dealings with the virus. In the first few days and weeks, officials have been accused of downplaying the severity of the virus. A doctor in Wuhan tried to warn colleagues late in December, and he was accused by authorities of spreading false information, although they later apologised. Then, in early February, the doctor himself was killed by the very virus he tried to warn against, sparking outrage at the Chinese government. Many experts now believe that by not alerting the public and healthcare professionals much earlier, a crucial opportunity was lost to stop the disease from becoming an epidemic. The coronavirus has been contained to an extent by widespread health interventions. That means quarantining those infected to stop the spread. That relies on huge international cooperation and identifying who's infected, where they've been, and who could have also got it. Countries are already making huge steps to control it, like monitoring airports, banning travel, and isolating patients. But these methods rely on the virus only spreading when people show symptoms, something which scientists are unsure about. Another way it could end is simply by a vaccine or a cure. Researchers in multiple countries are trying to find a vaccine, but at the moment there isn't one, and it could be months or even a year before there's a breakthrough. What we do know is that the major risk comes from the virus spreading to countries who do not have as advanced healthcare systems. These countries would be less able to cope with an outbreak and less effective at quarantining and controlling the spread.
Our greatest concern is the potential for the virus to spread to countries with weaker health systems and which are ill prepared to deal with it.
The key message from the WHO is to prepare all countries for the possibility of an outbreak and to ensure they are ready to contain it. The WHO also says that the world is still not ready for a global pandemic, that often we operate on a, quote, cycle of panic and neglect. So basically, we throw money at problems when they break out, but do nothing to ensure we're prepared to prevent the next one.
The world remains dangerously unprepared for a global pandemic. For too long, the world has operated on a cycle of panic and neglect. We throw money at an outbreak, and when it's over, we forget about it and do nothing to prevent the next one. This is dangerously short-sighted and frankly difficult to understand. If we fail to prepare, we're preparing to fail.
As China and other countries continue to try to contain the virus, what's the best advice for you regarding the outbreak? The Department of Health in the UK has called the coronavirus a serious and imminent threat to public health, but the overall risk in the UK remains moderate. For those of you who visited China, Thailand, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia or Macau in the last 14 days and have a cough, fever or difficulty breathing, Public Health England says you must contact your GP by phone. A number of experts have said there's no need for the general public to wear masks in places where the risk of infection is low. The current WHO infection control advice for the general public does not mention masks or goggles, focusing instead on hand washing, covering the mouth while sneezing, and avoiding raw and undercooked food.
To stop transmission of this virus, it's very important that sick people wear masks. That's for clear. For people who have no symptoms, the mask will not necessarily protect them 100% because if they don't apply other measures, it's not sufficient. So my message is more that mask alone is not enough. It's a package of measures that you have to put in place, and if people use the entire package, is fine. If they just use mask, I think it's not enough.
So that's how the novel coronavirus went from an unknown infection in a market in Wuhan to a global health scare that has dominated news headlines for most of 2020. What comes next depends on how countries around the world cooperate to ensure the virus is contained. Social distancing, lockdowns, mass testing and herd immunity. In this video, we're going to look at each of those responses to coronavirus and see what's happened when they've been used. COVID-19 has brought countries to a standstill and they've all responded in different ways. We saw a lockdown in Wuhan in China. Now countless others have done the same. Italy, Spain, France. Cities like here in London have called on people to socially distance and work from home, which is why I'm talking to you from my bedroom. Now, why are governments taking these measures? The main thing is flattening the curve.
What we need to do is flatten that down.
Flatten the curve.
Flattening this curve.
Why do you want to flatten the curve?
That's the idea that in fighting this pandemic, we need to slow the rate of infections to give hospitals the chance to deal with patients without being overwhelmed, as well as giving us more time to find remedies and vaccines. Now, while everyone agrees on the need to flatten the curve, how we get there has been up to debate. So let's take a look. Now, one of the earliest methods to implement is social distancing. Now, a virus like COVID-19 can be spread when people with it have close, sustained contact with others who do not yet have it. So social distancing is about trying to stop the chances of that happening. So that's not just hanging out with people with the virus, it's cutting down on all non-essential social interactions, as well as not using public transport when possible and working from home, like me right now. It's also about avoiding large and small gatherings. Germany recently said there should be no gatherings of more than 2 people. That's why in places like here in London, clubs, restaurants, pubs, leisure centres have all been closed.
Social distancing is implemented once public health officials recognize that the disease is going to spread. It is here, it's going to spread, but there are actions that we can take in order to reduce the rate at which it spreads. Social distancing is a tried and true public health intervention.
Given that social distancing is an agreed upon method to helping stem the spread, that's why some experts criticise countries like the UK for not calling for social distancing earlier. The UK's chief science officer said that it wanted to time things correctly and there was a danger in moving too quickly.
So the timing is critical. And that's true across all of the interventions we've looked at. That's why this is a package of things that need to happen at the right time and in the right phasing.
However, the UK government switched its path a few days later, as new modelling showed that drastic suppression measures, like social distancing, would cut deaths to tens of thousands rather than hundreds of thousands. For that to happen, the modelling said all households needed to reduce contact outside the house, school or workplace by 75%. But there's still a lot of criticism that social distancing is not being adhered to. Look at Bondi Beach in Sydney after Australians were told to social distance. It was still packed. The beach did eventually close after scenes like these.
If the community does not comply, well then this is going to become the new norm.
So what happens when you make this type of thing mandatory rather than advisory? One step further than social distancing is locking down an entire city or even country. That's what we first saw in Wuhan on January the 23rd, where the coronavirus was first recorded. China put people in the region of Hubei, home to nearly 60 million people, under strict quarantine and travel was restricted. The WHO said it was a move unprecedented in public history. What did that mean? Well, in Wuhan, all public transport, including buses, railways, flights and ferry services, were suspended, and residents were not allowed to leave the city without permission. In Italy, we saw the same thing, with 60 million people told to stay at home where possible. Residents can only go outside due to an urgent need, like buying necessities, and are expected to carry a form justifying their reason for travel. They face a fine if not. France also did the same on March the 16th, issuing a strict 15-day lockdown.
And the UK, after a week of asking people to socially distance, enforced their measures with a 3-week lockdown.
If you don't follow the rules, the police will have the powers to enforce them, including through fines and dispersing gatherings.
Yet Bruce Aylward of the WHO said that China stemmed the virus's spread by rapidly testing people, placing those confirmed or suspected to have it in immediate isolation, and then quarantining those who had close contact with that person for 14 days.
The population knew what it was looking for. They knew what this disease was. They knew where to go to get tested, and they could be isolated and taken care of very, very quickly. People were part of the solution. They were the surveillance system. And what worries me always, man, is everyone starts with, we can't do what China did. And I said, well, why not? And they said, well, we can't lock down a whole city. And I said, well, China didn't either. I mean, they have thousands and thousands of cities. They locked down a few, where it had really gotten out of control.
And that's where we come on to ensuring everyone gets tested. The WHO has always held up South Korea as an example of how to tackle the spread of the coronavirus.
A month ago, the Republic of Korea was faced with accelerating community transmission, but it didn't surrender. It developed an innovative testing strategy. It did exhaustive contact tracing.
South Korea very quickly developed a test and immediately began testing thousands and thousands of people. They could do 20,000 in a day, even testing those who do not have symptoms, using drive-through centres as well as novel facilities like this, a sort of phone box drop-in outside a hospital in Seoul that allows anyone to take a test without coming into contact with a doctor.
간단합니다. 공중전화 박스 크기의 부스 안에서 환자가 들어가서 진료를 받는 그런 시스템을 말하는 건데요. 그러면 의사와 간호사는 부스 밖에 있게 되는 겁니다. 그러면 일단 직접 접촉을 안 하게 되는 거죠.
So South Korea made testing free and available to all and quarantined those who had the virus. One infectious disease expert told Science magazine that South Korea's example showed that, quote, contact tracing is also very influential in epidemic control, as is case isolation. Basically what Bruce Aylward from the WHO was saying earlier. But countries like South Korea and China also used apps to monitor the spread of the virus, the ability to know who has the virus and look at who they've come into contact with. So how do those apps work? Here's a little explanation. Here, subject A has the coronavirus, but doesn't yet know it or show any symptoms. In their day-to-day life, if they come into contact with other people at home, on public transport, or even at work, when their symptoms begin to show, they can request a test. And if it's positive, all the people they interacted with are immediately notified by the app and told to self-isolate and get tested themselves. The places they've visited are then decontaminated. Of course, this raises the issue of the invasion of privacy and us entering a sort of Big Brother world. But is that worth it when trying to fight this virus?
It's about using a 21st century technology to implement age-old principles of epidemiology to rapidly, instantaneously identify those people at risk themselves and those people at risk of passing on their virus to other people.
Now, things like social distancing and lockdowns are about suppression, which aims to reverse epidemic growth. Yet there was a lot of discussion about the concept of herd immunity after Sir Patrick Vallance said this.
It's not possible to stop everybody getting it, and it's also actually not desirable because you want some immunity in the population. We need to have immunity to protect ourselves from this in the future.
He talked about 60% of the population in the UK, some 40 million people, catching the virus to get towards this herd immunity. That herd immunity concept is the idea that if enough people become immune to the illness, in this case because there is no vaccine, they contract the virus and recover, the coronavirus can no longer spread. Basically, the more people you meet who are resistant to the infection, the less likely the illness has to infect someone who is susceptible. After a while, the virus will not be able to infect enough people to sustain itself in a population. However, that approach was criticised, including from one of China's main respiratory specialists.
往后我觉得不能够靠这个所谓的集体的免疫来解决问题，这是一个传染性很高、病死率很高的。
Certainly, we still don't know if people who catch the coronavirus will become immune for life afterwards, and it's not clear whether people can become infected again, or whether the disease will behave like flu in the future and mutate into new strains to which people are not immune. And it's worth remembering amidst all this that people here are changing their habits to help tackle this virus. A new survey by Imperial showed that more than half of the population are avoiding crowded areas and 83% are washing their hands more frequently.
We know COVID-19 started in the city of Wuhan in China. Most scientists think that bats are the original source of the virus, and then it jumped to humans in a Wuhan wet market. But American intelligence is now saying that COVID-19 may have come from a lab. China rejects this claim entirely, and most scientists think it's unlikely too. So what's the truth? Is the Wuhan lab theory pure conspiracy, a distraction technique for US political ends? Or is it a question worth asking? This video will tell you what we know and what we don't know about the origin of the coronavirus. On December the 31st, the Chinese government told the World Health Organization that a new disease had emerged in Wuhan. They shared the genetic sequence. The following day, they closed a local wet market selling live wild animals. Wuhan was then locked down on January the 23rd. The next day, an article from Chinese scientists was published in the medical journal The Lancet. They said only 27 out of the 41 initial cases were linked to the market. So what were the other potential origins? The uncertainty gave rise to the theory that COVID-19 may have originated in a nearby Wuhan Center for Disease Control or the Wuhan Institute of Virology. President Trump, always happy to blame
China,
now says he's seen evidence.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
And what gives you a high degree of confidence that this originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
I can't tell you that. I'm not allowed to tell you that.
The director of the Wuhan lab denies it had anything to do with starting COVID-19.
As people who carry out viral studies, we clearly know what kind of research is going on at the Institute and how the Institute manages viruses and samples. As we said early on, there's no way this virus came from us.
Chinese authorities are often criticized for their lack of transparency. Early on, they silenced whistleblowers like Dr. Li Wenliang, who raised concerns about the severity of the coronavirus before dying from it himself.
Yes, China did a number of things pretty badly. It underplayed and even denied widespread community transmission.
And foreign experts, including officials from the World Health Organization, haven't been allowed into China to help investigate the origin of the virus. All this has given the US administration ammunition.
Remember, China has a history of infecting the world. There is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan. Look, the best experts so far seem to think it was man-made. I have no reason to disbelieve that at this point.
Except they don't.
The virus is not deliberately manufactured. There's no motive for doing that. There is no genetic evidence for that.
Some conspiracy theorists have even gone as far as to say that the virus could have been a bioweapon, deliberately engineered by the Chinese to wreak havoc on the rest of the world. Most intelligence agencies and scientists, though, reject this claim.
Why would you use this kind of virus? It would rebound against your own population. It doesn't make sense as a motive whatsoever.
Okay, so let's talk about the possibility of an accidental lab leak.
Well, it certainly is possible that the pandemic could be the result of safety lapses in the course of basic scientific research. There could be infections in the lab, there could be lab leaks, there could be waste that hasn't been incinerated properly, there could be fieldwork infections.
Concerns were raised in 2018 about whether correct safety measures were being followed at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The US State Department sent officials to go and check it out, and they say they found safety and management weaknesses. But scientists have been quick to defend the professionalism of the institute.
Many of my colleagues here in the United States have worked with those scientists in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and generally their reputation is that they are world-class virologists working in a state-of-the-art facility that has been developed with the input of European and US researchers.
So most scientists say while there is a chance the virus could have somehow leaked from the lab, it's unlikely. And the weight of scientific evidence suggests that COVID-19 first spread naturally.
We do know that there are thousands of Chinese bat coronaviruses in China, in Southeast Asia. We know a lot of viruses are actually transmitted by bats into humans. And some examples of this are Ebola virus, Marburg virus, Nipah virus. The most likely explanation for this is that somebody encountered a bat infected with a novel coronavirus that also had the capability of infecting humans. Another likely scenario is that somebody encountered another animal species that had encountered a bat carrying one of these coronaviruses.
This is where the wet market comes in.
Even if the virus had escaped from the Wuhan Research Lab, that particular virus still has to go through an intermediate host, which is a wildlife animal, to jump to humans.
In the wet market in Wuhan, seafood and wildlife, among other things, are bought and sold in cramped and dirty conditions. Wild animals are a delicacy for a small proportion of the well-off in Chinese society. Not all wet markets are unhygienic, but if they are, a bat could easily infect another animal with blood, pus or droppings. Then all it takes is for a trader to have a cut or a wound which comes into contact with that animal and they're infected too. Or for that animal to be bought and eaten as a delicacy.
When you put a large number of animals in a small space, you run the risk of the outbreak of pandemics.
There are also millions of people in China and Southeast Asia living near bat caves that could be exposed somehow to coronaviruses.
It's totally possible that there is another explanation besides market lab.
So we know the scientific consensus says COVID-19 most likely started naturally. The virus jumped from a bat to a human somehow, or from a bat to another animal, to a human in a wet market. While it's good to ask questions about it leaking from a lab experiment, scientists say it's not likely. And this virus hasn't been tampered with or manufactured. And scientists say it isn't, to the disappointment of some conspiracy theorists, a weapon engineered for biowarfare. The key point from scientists is don't make this political.
It frustrates me a great deal because it's not quite clear to me what the State Department is actually saying other than we're suspicious. And talking about these suspicions as if they're fact without producing any type of evidence to support them, I think is both politically and scientifically very dangerous. Much of what we know about bat SARS-like coronaviruses is the result of these fruitful and productive collaborations with scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and in China.
Although President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump are at completely polar ends of the political spectrum, they both appear to be touting theories without proper evidence to back them up. China's latest is that an American Army reservist brought the virus into Wuhan when she took part in the military games in October 2019.
The truth is that this is all part of the kind of power struggle between the two superpowers that began with a trade war. Just has no place in dealing with a current public health crisis that we really need to focus on extensively.
It's politically useful for Trump and Xi to play the blame game. A simple cause is an easy sell, and with thousands of Chinese citizens and tens of thousands of Americans dead from the virus, a simple cause helps both Trump and Xi deflect criticism over how they've handled the crisis on their own soil. But this virus is anything but simple.
There are going to be several major independent investigations. I served on several of the post-Ebola commissions. We're already...
The World Health Organization has just said that the novel coronavirus outbreak can be called a pandemic. new outbreaks have been reported in Iraq, Brazil, Greece, Israel, Nigeria, New Zealand, and the list goes on. There are now more new cases being reported daily from outside China than inside. But what is a pandemic? And why are the WHO only calling it one now? In this video, we're going to look at what that means and if it actually changes anything. So what is a pandemic? The word itself comes from the Greek for all and people, but that doesn't mean it has to affect literally every person on the planet. And currently there's no universal definition that everyone agrees on. We usually use the word to mean a new infectious illness that is spreading uncontrollably in different regions of the world, although not necessarily everywhere. And although the WHO has said people can call COVID-19 a pandemic, they don't give official classifications to illnesses themselves.
Pandemics as such are not declared. This is a characterization or a description of a situation. And the DG has said it is not a change in what we do. It is not a trigger for anything other than more aggressive, more intensive actions.
So why has the WHO only now called COVID-19 a pandemic? Going by the common definition, the coronavirus has some characteristics of a pandemic. It's a new virus and was unknown to science before December last year, and it's spreading rapidly across borders in multiple continents despite efforts to contain it. So it certainly appears to meet those criteria. But the WHO was reluctant to use the word pandemic until March the 11th. That's because although the virus spread to different regions, the majority of cases could be linked back to a source.
If we say there's a pandemic of coronavirus, we're essentially accepting that every human on the planet will be exposed to that virus.
But now the WHO has used the word pandemic because in the past 2 weeks, the number of cases outside China has increased 13-fold and the number of affected countries has tripled. But they were quick to urge caution in using this word.
Pandemic is not a word to use lightly or carelessly. It's a word that, if misused, can cause unreasonable fear or unjustified acceptance that the fight is over.
It's important to note that the word pandemic doesn't tell us anything about the severity of the virus, just the spread. Take mortality rates, for example. The WHO has put the global death rate from coronavirus at around 3.4% of those it infects, and that number also changes depending on which country you're in. So far, more than 4,000 people have died from the virus around the world. The mortality rate from Ebola was around 50% and it killed 11,000 people. Yet Ebola was never defined as a pandemic, as it was mostly within West and Central Africa. Just because something is a pandemic, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's extremely deadly. It just means it has spread far. The last time the WHO declared a pandemic, for the 2009 swine flu outbreak, it was criticised by some countries for unnecessarily spreading fear about an illness with a death rate of around 0.02%.
I have spoken consistently about the need for facts, not fear. Using the word pandemic now does not fit the facts, but it may certainly cause fear. This is not the time to focus on what word we use.
The WHO does have a pandemic preparedness plan, a guide for countries on what to do. It says governments should be ready to fully mobilise healthcare and make safety equipment and medical supplies widely available and distribute it where necessary. Take Victoria in Australia, for example. In their worst case scenario, they say they're ready to potentially lock down whole cities and close schools. They anticipate up to 40% of the entire country's workforce could be sidelined by the virus. They even say these effects could last up to a whole year. And in the UK, the government has an emergency plan which could shut down public transport and stop mass gatherings and events. But again, these are plans for the worst case scenario. Most countries are already taking huge steps to try and stop the virus's spread through quarantine and restricting travel. And most countries advise that anyone who thinks they may have come into contact with the virus to self-isolate until the incubation period passes. And that's currently thought to be around 14 days, although scientists are still unsure. Some people argue that labelling COVID-19 as a pandemic doesn't actually mean much, as it's already being taken seriously anyway, and wouldn't really change how countries are responding at the moment.
I think it's just a term, and it probably isn't going to make what we do different.
The major risk of the virus spreading out of control comes from it infecting those in countries which do not have advanced healthcare systems. Those places would be less able to cope with an outbreak and less effective at quarantining and controlling infection. That's when the virus could spread rapidly and the death toll could spike. And it's a situation the WHO desperately wants to avoid.
We're not saying that the world should move from containment to mitigation. 81 countries have no cases, so they should do everything to prevent from importing any case. There are 57 countries who have reported less than 10 cases, 10 or less cases. They can cut it from the bud.
So there you have it. That's what a pandemic is, why the coronavirus has now been declared one, and what it all might mean for how countries tackle the virus as it spreads.
This outbreak, Wuhan, which is the epicenter of the virus, is going to be in fact restricting car traffic in the city, and this is going to happen from Sunday on. The government has issued a travel advisory to Indian travelers to China. Government says all non-essential travel to China is going to be avoided.
That's how it began. A disease that broke out thousands of kilometers away from us. A disease we thought would begin and end in China. But instead, it took over the whole world, bringing life to a standstill.
ये आवश्यक है कि वैश्विक महामारी के इस वातावरण में मानव जाति विजयी हो, भारत विजयी हो।
The first indication that the novel coronavirus would reach Indian shores came at the end of January 2020, a month after it was first reported in Wuhan.
This is big breaking news coming in, and this is very, very worrying for India. One positive case of the coronavirus has been detected. It has been detected in Kerala.
The Kerala government quickly swung into action, isolating the patient and tracing her recent contacts. In 5 days, Kerala declared it as a calamity.
This is after a third student tested positive for the infection in the state. West Bengal's government has identified at least 8 people who returned from China and travelled with the Kerala student from Wuhan.
With about 2,500 people placed in home quarantine in Kerala, the situation seemed to be under control, until Italy was identified as another possible hotspot. In the first week of March, 3 cases were reported. A 45-year-old man in Delhi who had travelled back to India, an Italian man in Jaipur who had earlier tested negative, a 24-year-old engineer in Hyderabad who had a travel history to the UAE. As cases kept rising, so did the panic buying.
Masks are being sold for double, triple rates at the moment in many of the shops, and the fact remains that there is not a single hand sanitizer, a thermometer or N95 mask available in this shop or any of the chemist shops in Mumbai.
On March 12th, a 76-year-old man from Kalaburgi, Karnataka, who had a travel history to the Middle East, became the first fatality due to COVID-19 in India. The government began urging people to disclose their travel history to contain the outbreak, but it seemed to fall on deaf ears.
An FIR has been registered against Bollywood singer Kanika Kapoor, who was confirmed as the first Indian celebrity to have tested positive for COVID-19. Now, the singer had recently returned from London, attended several parties in Lucknow before she was contracted with the coronavirus.
From March 22nd, India banned international flights, initially for just 1 week and then indefinitely. A ban on domestic travel soon followed, as did a 14-hour Janta curfew.
हम अपने घर के दरवाजे पर खड़े होकर या बालकनी में या खिड़कियों के सामने खड़े होकर 5 मिनट तक रविवार को शाम को 5 बजे 5 मिनट तक ऐसे लोगों का आभार व्यक्त करें.
And people across the nation did, from celebrities to politicians to the common man, gathering together to clap and cheer for the essential workers. Then came this bombshell.
हिंदुस्तान के हर नागरिक को बचाने के लिए, आपको बचाने के लिए, आपके परिवार को बचाने के लिए आज रात 12 बजे से घरों से बाहर निकलने पर पूरी तरह पाबंदी लगाई जा रही है.
With that, the once bustling roads of India stood empty as people kept to their homes, only venturing out to buy essential items. The decision was praised as a bold move and the only one available to curb the spread of the virus. But it had a devastating impact on the informal sector.
The lockdown has stranded thousands of casual workers in Delhi who are now struggling to survive. While some are taking the long road home, others are reduced to living life on the roads, queuing for handouts and risking mass infections.
In terms of human cost, it was incalculable. Apart from losing their daily earnings, migrant workers had to walk on foot for days to reach their village, often on empty stomachs. Although citizens largely stayed at home, there were many who broke the curfew and were severely punished. There were also other methods that police resorted to keep people in line. Then came news that a gathering of Tablighi devotees in Delhi led to India's first cluster outbreak.
One center in Delhi has now become the epicenter for not just a cluster outbreak but for a possible community outbreak across India.
The Tablighi Jamaat case unleashed a wave of Islamophobia until the Supreme Court finally had to intervene. Meanwhile, even with the lockdown firmly in place, cases in India kept rising.
We are over 9,000 cases now. The worry seems to be this, the rate of addition of new cases. We're adding 700 plus, and that number seems to be hovering around that figure. We need to bring that down to single digits.
Maharashtra in particular was worrying, given its high population density and the rapid spread of the virus in slum areas.
Okay, bad news once again, and this is from Mumbai. Number of positive cases in Mumbai's Dharavi has now crossed the 100 mark. 101 cases is where Dharavi stands today. 10 deaths reported so far.
Amidst the gloom and doom, there emerged a few good Samaritans. One of them, actor Sonu Sood, emerged as a real-life hero.
Actor Sonu Sood, he's been organizing transport for stranded migrant workers in Mumbai who have run out of cash and patience. His buses take them back to Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, Jharkhand and Bihar. In the last 2 days, Sonu Sood has expanded his philanthropy and launched a toll-free number for people to contact him in case they need his help.
Actually, these are the people who build our homes, our roads, our offices. And now when they want to go back to their homes, there's no one to help them, and they are, I would say, feeling so helpless that, there's no one actually to take them back to their homes. The states are not accepting them. Then I realized that it's not about the story of 350, but the millions who are stuck. So then I thought, no, it's a journey that has to continue, and I'll make sure that every migrant who's stuck anywhere in the part of the country, I'll make sure that he will reach his home safely. So that's what I've been doing now.
With industries and MSMEs struggling to make an income during the lockdown period, India announced a limited unlock in June.
So we are in the famous Jhandewala market of Delhi. It's a cycle market. If you just see the crowd here, there's not enough space to maintain the kind of social distancing. Behind me, if you can see that group there, they're trying to buy their cycles. Not enough space, and yet this is when the odd even is still in place.
The line you see behind me is not outside a supermarket, grocery store for any essential service. But this is a line at Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanam Center in Hyderabad. And these people who are in the line are here to pick up the famous prasad of the Tirumala temple, that's the laddu.
But despite precautionary measures and strict guidelines, the cases continue to rise.
Big day today, India crossing the 10 lakh mark. Only the third country in the world to have 10 million cases. Remember, the active cases right now are inching close to that 3.5 lakh mark. 34,000, almost 35,000 cases added over a 24-hour period. That again is a new high in terms of the daily infections. The number of deaths also going past 25,000 today. 687 again is a new record for the number of deaths.
In just 30 days, that number had doubled. By August, most local businesses were up and running as the world and India limped back to normalcy with its public events and private ceremonies. By mid-September, India had reached its peak, after which cases started declining. Corporate offices continued working from home, and online classes also continued in full swing as young children learned to adapt to the new normal.
Is India past its COVID peak? Yes, says the government. It also says that 30% of our population has already developed antibodies, which means 30% of Indians have had COVID and recovered from it.
During this time, the world also realized that a vaccine was the only way out of this chaos. And global vaccine makers rushed with their research and trials to perfect the COVID-19 vaccine. India too saw a glimmer of hope.
India started work on the vaccine quite early. Serum Institute of India had a tie-up with AstraZeneca in the first week of June itself to deliver for India and other low-income countries.
November saw a flurry of activity on the vaccine front, with several vaccines reporting over 90% efficacy in their phase 3 trials. Bharat Biotech's co-vaccine trials saw high-profile volunteers like AMU VC Professor Tariq Mansoor and Haryana Minister Anil Vij. India has seen a drastic rise in COVID-19 cases over the months, but with mandatory mask wearing and social distancing rules, we have largely been able to contain it. Now that vaccination trials have begun, the focus is now on logistics and how to deliver these vaccines to 1 billion Indians in 2021.
अगस्त और दिसंबर के बीच में 216 करोड़ अगर हम इस सीन को लेकर चले, डोजेस भारत में निर्मित होंगी. $2 billion doses in a matter of 5 months will be made in India. For India, for people of India.
All these things can be done. We need to really relook at the current situation. We should think that this is a warlike situation. There are only two agencies which can vaccinate, government and the private. Government institutions have limitations. They do not have flexibility to vaccinate the way we can vaccinate. I'll give you a simple example. If I am given few million vaccines and told to vaccinate, I can vaccinate 26,000 people in one campus in 24 hours. If people are desperate enough to want the vaccine, I will give the appointment to come to my hospital 2 o'clock at night. We will have 24-hour shift and we vaccinate whoever comes to the hospital. And we can always do all this documentation, everything later.
overwhelmed hospitals, people dying on the streets from lack of oxygen, and packed crematoriums. This is a snapshot of the COVID-19 crisis in India. In contrast, just a few months ago, the Prime Minister declared victory against the pandemic.
उस देश ने कोरोना पर प्रभावी नियंत्रण करके पूरी दुनिया को, मानवता को बड़ी त्रासदी से भी बचाया है.
After that, there were political rallies, mass gatherings, and religious festivals, like this one. And then on April 21st, the country reported a record number of COVID-19 cases in a single day. And those numbers kept growing for several weeks, with many health experts saying real numbers are likely much higher. By May 7th, deaths soared past 4,000. As COVID cases in several Western countries have trended lower, the scale of infection in India and a new variant first reported there have alarmed the rest of the world.
If you have a huge country like India that's deep in its own COVID crisis, right? That means the pandemic is not going to end for the world.
Here's how India became the world's COVID hotspot and what that means for the global pandemic. First, we have to go back to early 2020. As much of the world was struggling to contain the virus, India appeared to have things under relative control.
आज रात 12 बजे से संपूर्ण देश में संपूर्ण लॉकडाउन होने जा रहा है.
Early on, Modi announced the world's largest lockdown in the country of 1.3 billion people.
He publicly came out multiple times and said, we have to pull together, we have to wear masks, we have to socially distance. There was a lot of respect for COVID restrictions, and people were also scared.
The measures triggered a mass migration of workers trying to get back home from cities. Epidemiologists warn that this movement of people could help spread the virus undetected to other parts of the country. But the number of reported COVID-19 cases remained relatively low, and India's apparent success stood in contrast to some other countries, including the US, which was reporting more cases than any other nation. Some public health experts said a possible reason for few cases in India could have been the lack of widespread testing. But they also noted that the majority of the population is under 25, and since asymptomatic cases are more common among young people, many may have gone undetected. After a 10-week lockdown, India started to ease restrictions and the number of cases started growing, with the first peak in September.
It was quite bad, and the healthcare system was stressed, but the hospitals didn't, crumble or buckle. And we saw that actually in other parts of the world, it was much worse.
Despite that first surge, by December, India's numbers had gone back down, and by early 2021, life looked like it was returning to normal.
Stores were back open, they were super packed, restaurants were open, filled with people indoor dining, there were cricket matches again, packed stadiums. Life in Delhi felt like another universe. The US was dealing with another wave, right, in December, January.
India was doing very well compared to the US or the UK. And that's when Modi touted the country's success in front of other global leaders at the World Economic Forum.
जो अपने ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा नागरिकों का जीवन बचाने में सफल रहा है.
So what went wrong? Public health experts blame India's ferocious surge on a combination of new factors. The first one, people became more relaxed about COVID safety measures. Many people stopped wearing masks, and there were several crowded gatherings, which public health experts say may have been super spreader events, including huge political rallies.
मैंने ऐसी सभा पहली बार देखी है जी.
April was a key election month, and political parties, including Modi's BJP party, organized events across the West Bengal state. A BJP spokesperson said that no one had anticipated the magnitude of the COVID-19 surge, adding that Modi and other members of his party followed all the safety protocols in place at the time. Right around then, resources to fight the pandemic weren't reinforced or maintained.
Everyone essentially thought that COVID was over. By January, hospitals were taking down their COVID-19 wards. Testing centers that had been started last year were also being dismantled. Some of the oxygen plants where they had allocated the budget were never built.
And on top of all of this, highly contagious variants that were first identified in the UK and South Africa were circulating in the country, as well as a new variant known as B1617 that originated in India.
The 617 in India, it's a wily opponent.
The WHO has said preliminary studies indicate that this one may be more contagious than some other variants and has since been detected in more than 40 countries, including the US, UK, and France. This has added urgency to the global vaccination race, which has so far helped cases plummet in some of those countries. So, even as the COVID situation has improved in some parts of the West, the fight against the pandemic across the globe is far from over.
A big lesson is just countries can't get complacent. And even if one country is doing well, if another country is not doing well in terms of COVID, that will affect every other country in the world too.
Corona pandemic has been raging for the last 1.5 years now. Things seem hopeless, but we know so much more about the virus now, so much more about what happens and what are the implications to the human body from the infection. But look at the first symptom that happened. And the first symptom that happened may be sore throat, irritation in the throat, cough, fever, body ache, headache. Occasionally loose motions also. But any or all of these are possible. And this is something which you must keep in mind as the first day of your infection producing symptom, the day one of your symptom. The coronavirus lodges in the throat and enters these cells in our pharynx, as we call it medically, the throat, and it becomes a part of this cell. It becomes a part of the cell because it overcomes the cell metabolism to its own advantage and uses the cell to multiply and make its own replicas. So within a short span of 1 or 2 days, you have millions of viruses within the cells that are infected. And once this invasion has happened into the cells and the numbers have multiplied, we have the body recognizing there is an invasion. The body then fights. Body fights by producing what are known as antibodies. That's the normal process. All viruses that infect our body are eliminated. They are not eliminated by drugs. They are eliminated by your own body's immune system producing antibodies and attacking and killing the virus. Usually it's about the 4th, 5th day when the antibodies are sufficient in number, the viruses are in large number, and there's a fight between the two. And in this fight, there are what are known as chemicals released into the bloodstream. These are known as cytokines. And these chemicals cause the body to have a higher temperature. They have fever, body to have myalgia, body aches. If it is a throat infection, they have sore throat. It causes a little cough from that irritation there. So these are consequences of the virus being there in the body in large numbers and the fight going on. Once that has happened, the sore throat may persist, the fever may go little high, the second day fever is there, third day fever is there, usually by 4th day fever comes down. In 80% of cases, this is the end result of the whole infection. 80% of people with the virus infection have only minor symptoms which settle in 3-4 days time and they are happily moving around. However, the disease in 10 to 15% or maybe 20% takes a dangerous turn. 3 key symptoms that warn you that the disease is going to a dangerous turn are fever that becomes higher grade than what it was before, or if there's no fever, new fever, usually more than 100 degree Fahrenheit that comes up. Second, a chest congestion or a difficulty in your inspiration expiration process. And the third is a deep kind of a cough which makes it difficult for you even when you lie down. So on the 5th, 6th day, if the patient has high fever, has bad cough and had breathlessness, think of the onset of a cytokine shower. And you have to prevent this at this stage, from the shower to become a storm, to prevent the cytokines from being released in large numbers. The steroid that we give either orally or parenterally, and that will prevent the cytokine shower becoming a big storm and causing the devastating consequences that we are seeing. So 2 key medicines that we have to do at this stage are the anticoagulants combined with the steroids. But remember, Steroids are not to be taken lightly. Anticoagulants are not to be taken lightly. So do not do this on your own. Do it on the recommendation of a physician. You would have managed the storm from happening, managed the worsening of the disease, and most patients have a good outcome. Normal human being has 2/3 of the lungs as reserve capacity lung. They're designed like that. So if you tell the patient to sit at home and wait till it starts dropping, you will have damaged your lungs to more than 2/3 of its normal functioning ability before your saturation drops. Then you rush to the hospital, then you have to be on oxygen, and invariably you go on to the ventilator. That's a catastrophic outcome. Don't wait for that. Don't sit at home with this digital sensor. Steroids suppress immunity, so you can cause infection. So when you started the steroids on the 5th day or 6th day, dramatically they become better. Oh, their fever is gone next day. Their cough is better. They feel better. They are stronger. They are okay, especially in the elderly, especially those with poor immunity. By around 4th day of steroids, they start having fever again. Oh, no, virus has come back. It's not the virus that has come back. Because the immunity is suppressed, the normal bacteria in our lungs, they attack our body and cause pneumonia. This time it is bacterial pneumonia. So this phase of infection is a bacterial infection which needs to be covered with antibiotics. So the key message that I am going to give you are very clear. When you think you are positive, if your symptoms are fitting, in consultation with the doctor, you have to manage it like that. So don't go by that, go by the first symptom. If you're asymptomatic after 5 days, be happy, you're a corona warrior. Once the dangerous turn is identified, then you treat it and prevent the cytokine storm by giving steroids and anticoagulants. Steroids for 10 days and anticoagulants for 3 weeks based on consultation with your doctor to prevent complications from both these drugs. Both are dangerous drugs, need to be under supervision only. So with this understanding of timelines, first symptom, first 5 days, nothing other than maybe some vitamins to supplement yourself and nothing else. No role of antibiotics in the first 5 days, antibiotics only in the last days of the second 5-day period. And once you've got that clear, you can avoid going to a hospital, you can manage at home in consultation with the doctor without having the serious consequences. Your need for hospitalization comes when you missed the bus of recognizing the red flags of the dangerous turn of autoantibodies attacking the blood vessels.
കേരളത്തിലാകെ ലോക്ക്ഡൌൺ വല്ലാതെ ഭീതി പകർന്ന നിലയുണ്ടാകും. എന്നാൽ നല്ല ജാഗ്രത ഇക്കാര്യത്തിൽ പാലിക്കും.
ലോകം കറുത്ത കയ്യിൽ ഉറക്കമില്ല, ചെറുത്തു നിൽപ്പിതെങ്ങും ഇല്ല കുറുക്കുപാത നമുക്ക് മുന്നിൽ, ഉറച്ച നെഞ്ചു മാത്രം ഉള്ളിൽ പതിച്ചൊരാതി, നിറച്ചു ഭീതി വിറച്ചു നിൽപ്പുഭൂമി, ഒന്നായി തടുത്തു നിർത്താം, തുടച്ചു നിൽക്കാം, ഉയർത്തെണീക്കുവാനായി ഇല്ല കുറുക്കുപാത നമുക്ക് മുന്നിൽ, ഉറച്ച നെഞ്ചു മാത്രം. ഉലകമഖിലം ദുരിതഭരിതമെന്നാലും തടരുമെന്നാലും അതിനെ മറികടന്ന തലപകലുകൾ ഇരവിരലുകൾ പടപൊരുതിടും, മുന്നേറും നമ്മൾ മുന്നേറും ത്വരിതഗതിയിലായി.
രോഗികൾ ശത്രുക്കളല്ല, രോഗമാണ് രോഗവ്യാപനത്തിന്റെ തോത് വലുതാവുകയാണ്. വെല്ലുവിളിയും ഉത്തരവാദിത്വവും അസാധാരണമാവിധം വർദ്ധിക്കുകയാണ്. ബ്രേക്ക് ദ ചെയിൻ എന്നതിന് നിയന്ത്രണത്തിന്റെ ചങ്ങല പൊട്ടിച്ചെറിയുക എന്നല്ല അർത്ഥം. രോഗവ്യാപനത്തിന്റെ ചങ്ങല കണ്ണികളാണ് പൊട്ടിച്ചെറിയുന്നത്.